Think you know the whole story? Turns out you were probably taught the half-truth. Welcome to Half-Truths. Think back to a classroom, maybe middle school. The lights are dimmed for a film strip, or a teacher is trying to inspire a room full of restless teenagers. And then they say it. They lean in conspiratorially and deliver a piece of information meant to blow your mind. Did you know, they say, that even the smartest person alive, even Albert Einstein, only used 10% of their brain? A quiet gasp goes through the room. Suddenly, the world feels bigger. You're not just an awkward kid struggling with algebra. You are a vessel of near-infinite, untapped potential. 90% of your mind is just sitting there, a vast, dark continent of intellectual power, waiting for a brave explorer to switch on the lights. What could you do if you could just unlock another 10%, or 20, or all of it? Could you learn any language in an afternoon, see the future, move objects with your mind? The idea is electrifying. It became a cultural touchstone, the ultimate piece of scientific trivia. It's the premise behind blockbuster movies like Limitless, where a simple pill unlocks the full 100%, turning a struggling writer into a master of the universe. It's the engine of the film Lucy, where Scarlett Johansson evolves into a being who can control matter, time, and space, all because she's tapping into that dormant gray matter. The 10% myth isn't just a fun fact. It's a promise that you are more than you are, that the key to greatness is already inside you, just locked behind a door you haven't yet learned how to open. It's a beautiful, hopeful, and deeply inspiring story. It has sold millions of books, fueled countless self-help seminars, and lodged itself so firmly in our collective consciousness that to question it feels almost cynical. But here on Half-Truths, we're in the business of pulling at the threads of the stories we think we know. So what if that story isn't the whole story? What if the most persistent, most widely believed fact about the human brain is not a scientific revelation, but a century-old piece of fiction? Today, we're putting our full brain power to the task of unlearning the single greatest myth about our minds, the idea that we only use 10% of our brain. The story we all know is simple, and that's part of its power. It states that the human brain, this 3-pound marvel of biology, is mostly dead weight. Like a massive mansion where we only live in a single room, the other 90% of our neural architecture sits quiet and unused. This dormant part is believed to hold the secrets to genius, to psychic abilities like telepathy and telekinesis, to photographic memory, to skills that would elevate us from mere mortals to something much, much more. The appeal is obvious. It's a profoundly democratic idea. It doesn't matter who you are, where you came from, or how smart you think you are now. You too have this vast reservoir of potential. It explains the existence of savants and prodigies. They must have just stumbled upon a way to access a little more of their brain than the rest of us. It offers a tidy, almost magical explanation for the gap between who we are and who we wish we could be. Feeling lazy, unmotivated, stuck in a rut, it's not your fault. You just haven't flipped the right switch in your head yet. This idea is propped up by what seems like an ironclad endorsement. As the story goes, Albert Einstein himself, the very symbol of human genius, lamented that he too only used a fraction of his own incredible mind. If even Einstein had 90% left in the tank, imagine what's possible for the rest of us. This supposed attribution gives the myth an unshakable air of authority. It's not just a pop culture trope, it's a scientific observation from one of the greatest minds in history. And so, the myth flourishes. It becomes the bedrock of a multi-billion-dollar self-help industry. Gurus and entrepreneurs sell courses, books, and technologies promising to unlock your hidden potential or activate your dormant brain power. They offer brain training games, meditation techniques, and dietary supplements, all aimed at helping you creep up from 10% to maybe 12 or 15. The myth transforms from a piece of trivia into a commercial enterprise, preying on our deepest insecurities and our most profound hopes for self-improvement. It's a story that tells us we are all superheroes in waiting. We just need to buy the right cape. And who wouldn't want to believe that? So, where did this incredibly sticky idea come from? If you go looking for the source, the first stop is usually Albert Einstein. It feels right, doesn't it? But if you search through his writings, his interviews, his personal letters, the entire vast archive of his life and work, you will find absolutely no record of him ever saying anything of the sort. The attribution to Einstein is a complete fabrication, a piece of intellectual name-dropping designed to give the idea a weight it never earned. The myth needed a credible source, and it simply borrowed the most credible name it could find. With Einstein out of the picture, the trail gets a little murkier, but much more interesting. The story doesn't begin with a single dramatic discovery, but with the slow twisting of several different ideas. One of the earliest threads leads us back to the turn of the 20th century, to the Harvard psychologist William James. In the early 1900s, James was writing about human potential, and he famously remarked that most people only use a small part of their possible mental and physical resources. He wrote, "We are making use of only a small part of our possible mental and physical resources." But look closely at what he's saying. James was talking about potential in a psychological sense, not a physiological one. He was a forerunner of the self-help movement, arguing that through focus, habit, and determination, people could achieve far more than they believed possible. He wasn't talking about unused lobes of the brain or dormant neurons. He was talking about getting off the couch and applying yourself. It was a motivational observation, not a neurological calculation. He was the world's first life coach, telling us we have latent energy we fail to tap into. He never put a number on it. He certainly never said 10%. So how did we get from a vague motivational sentiment to a precise, scientific-sounding number? The next key figure is a man named Lowell Thomas, a famous writer and broadcaster. In 1936, Thomas wrote the foreword to one of the most successful books of all time, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Looking for a snappy way to sell Carnegie's ideas, Thomas reached for that old concept from William James, but he added his own flair. He wrote that William James used to say that the average man develops only 10% of his latent mental ability. And there it is, the first appearance of the number. It was likely just a number that sounded good, small enough to be inspiring, but big enough to be plausible. Lowell Thomas, in the service of marketing a self-help book, plucked a number out of thin air, attributed it to a respected psychologist, and launched the myth into the stratosphere. Carnegie's book sold tens of millions of copies, and that little factoid in the foreword went along for the ride, repeated over and over until it was accepted as gospel. At the same time, Early neuroscience was inadvertently providing fuel for the fire. In the 1920s and 30s, researchers like Carl Lashley were trying to figure out where memories were stored in the brain. He would teach rats to run through mazes, then surgically remove different parts of their cerebral cortex. To his surprise, he often found that the rats could still remember how to run the maze, albeit a little slower. He couldn't pinpoint a single area where the memory was located. This led some to conclude that huge parts of the cortex weren't essential, that they were what was called silent cortex. This was, of course, a misinterpretation. We now know that memory is distributed across wide networks in the brain, not stored in one little box. And those silent areas weren't silent because they were unused. They were silent because their functions, things like complex reasoning, planning, and integrating sensory information, weren't as immediately obvious as, say, moving a limb, but to a public eager for simple answers, the takeaway was clear. Scientists had found the 90%. They had found the parts of the brain that were just sitting around, doing nothing. A psychologist's metaphor, a marketer's invention, and a misunderstanding of early science all converged. The 10% myth was born, not from a single lie, but from a cascade of half-truths. Now we arrive at the best part. The part where we get to replace the flimsy, worn-out myth with a reality that is infinitely more inspiring. The truth is, not that we have a mostly useless brain, but that we have a spectacularly efficient one. And the evidence against the 10% myth is overwhelming, coming at it from every possible angle of neuroscience. Let's start with evolution. The human brain is preposterously expensive from a metabolic standpoint. It makes up only about 2 to 3% of our body weight, but it consumes a staggering 20% of our oxygen and calories. Brain tissue is the most energetically costly tissue in the body. Evolution is a ruthless accountant. It does not tolerate waste. The idea that natural selection would favor the development of a massive energy-guzzling organ that was 90% useless is, frankly, absurd. It would be like building a supercar and then only installing a lawnmower engine. If that extra 90% of brain matter wasn't pulling its weight and providing a significant survival advantage, it would have been eliminated from the gene pool millions of years ago. Then there's the evidence from modern brain imaging. Technologies like positron emission tomography, or PET scans, and functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, allow us to watch the brain in action. They measure blood flow and electrical activity, showing us which parts of the brain are working during any given task. What do they show? That over the course of a day, virtually all of your brain is used. When you're talking, a certain network of regions lights up. When you're listening to music, another network activates. When you're walking or dreaming, or even just sitting and thinking, your brain is a storm of activity. There are no vast, silent, dormant areas waiting for a magic pill. It's all being used, just not all at the exact same time. Think of it like your muscles. You don't contract every muscle in your body simultaneously. That would be a seizure. You use them as needed. The brain is the same. It's a symphony of coordinated activity, not a single blaring note. The field of clinical neurology provides perhaps the most tragic and compelling refutation of the myth. If 90% of the brain were truly unused, then most brain injuries should have little to no effect. You could suffer a stroke, a head trauma, or a tumor in one of those silent areas, and you'd be perfectly fine. But we know this is tragically untrue. Decades of medical evidence show that damage to almost any area of the brain has specific and often devastating consequences, affecting our ability to speak, to see, to remember, to feel emotion, or to control our own bodies. Neurologists have not found a single part of the brain that can be damaged without a loss of function. There is no non-essential 90%. It's all essential. Finally, there's the simple biological principle of use it or lose it. The brain, much like a muscle, prunes away what it doesn't need. During infancy and adolescence, the brain undergoes a process of synaptic pruning, where unused neural connections wither and die off to make the entire system more efficient. If the vast majority of your brain were inactive, we would expect to see massive cellular degeneration in those areas. But we don't. The brain maintains its cells because they are all part of an active working system. The 10% myth imagines the brain as a hard drive with a huge amount of empty space. The reality is that the brain is not a storage device. It is a living, dynamic, ever-changing network. And this brings us to the real miracle. The concept that should replace the 10% myth in our popular imagination, neuroplasticity. This is the brain's incredible ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. It's how we learn and how we remember. It's how we recover from injury. When you learn a new skill, like playing the piano, you aren't activating a piano-playing part of your brain that was previously dormant. Instead, you are physically rewiring the parts of your brain responsible for motor control, hearing, and touch, strengthening the connections between those neurons. This is where our true potential lies. Not in some mythical, unused 90%, but in the near-infinite capacity of our fully active brains to adapt, change, and grow. The power of the brain isn't in its unused space, but in its boundless ability to make new connections. The story of our potential is not about flipping a switch to turn on a dark room. It's about the patient, effortful work of building a brighter, more complex, and more interconnected network within the space we already have. So, we began this journey with a simple, tantalizing idea. A brain full of empty rooms waiting to be explored. A story that offered us a shortcut to genius and a simple explanation for our limitations. It was a comforting myth, whispering that we were all just one step away from becoming extraordinary. But by pulling on that thread, we unraveled a tale of misquotes, marketing gimmicks, and misunderstood science. In its place, we found a truth that is, in its own way, far more profound. We replaced the image of a dormant, lazy brain with the reality of a hyper-efficient, energy-intensive, and fully engaged organ. We learn that every part of our brain has a purpose forged by millions of years of evolution and honed by every moment of our individual lives. The real story isn't about unlocking what's unused, but about appreciating the staggering complexity of what is being used every second of every day. Why does correcting this myth matter? Because the 10% fallacy does more than just sell books and movie tickets. It fundamentally misrepresents what it means to be human. It encourages us to look for magical solutions to complex problems and fosters a sense of dissatisfaction with the brains we actually have. It devalues the real work of learning, which is not about unlocking a secret compartment, but about the slow, deliberate, and powerful process of rewiring our own minds through practice and effort. The real science of neuroplasticity is more empowering than any myth. It tells us that change is possible, that growth is constant, and that we are the architects of our own neural landscape. The most amazing thing about your brain is not that there is so much of it you don't use. The most amazing thing is that you are using all of it, right now, to even contemplate the idea. Now you know the real story. What other half-truths are still out there? If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a comment, and join us next time. Until then, stay curious.